someone talks over you in a meeting. A friend makes a joke at your expense in front of others. A family member dismisses your opinion like it means nothing. You feel it right away, a small burn in your chest, and later that night you replay it, thinking of what you should have said. Most people spend years carrying these small moments, waiting for the day they can prove someone wrong. This feeling is normal. It is also exactly what the Stoics studied and solved over 2,000 years ago. They did not teach revenge. They taught something quieter and far more effective. In this video, you will learn the real Stoic method for making disrespect turn into regret, not through anger, but through change so deep that people cannot help but notice it. Before we continue, if this message speaks to you, hit like and subscribe. This channel is built for people who want calm strength, not loud reactions, and more of this is coming. Number 1, understand why disrespect hurts you and why that is the real battle. Disrespect stings because it touches a part of you that wants to be seen as valuable. When someone dismisses your words, ignores your effort, or mocks you in front of others, the pain is not really about them. It is about a private fear that maybe they are right, that maybe you are not enough. The Stoics understood this pattern well. Epictetus, once a slave who later became one of the most respected teachers in Rome, taught that people are not disturbed by events, but by the judgments they attach to those events. The disrespect itself is just words or actions. The suffering comes from what your mind decides those words mean about your worth. This is uncomfortable to hear because it removes the easy excuse. It is simple to say someone hurt you and leave it there. It is harder to sit with the idea that your own mind gave that person the power to hurt you in the first place. Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor who ruled one of the largest empires in history, wrote privately in his journal that no one can harm him except himself, because harm only happens if he lets his character be changed by it. This was not arrogance. It was a private reminder to himself, written when he was tired, insulted, and surrounded by people who wanted to see him fail. Once you understand this, the real battle becomes clear. It is not you against the person who disrespected you. It is you against your own reaction. Every time you lash out, sulk, or obsess over the moment, you're fighting the wrong opponent. The person who insulted you moved on within minutes. You are the one still carrying it hours or days later, replaying it, losing sleep over it, letting it steal your focus from things that actually matter. This is the quiet trap most people fall into without realizing it, and it is the first thing Stoic training aims to fix. Seneca, a statesman and philosopher who served under difficult and dangerous rulers, wrote to a friend about anger, calling it a temporary madness that convinces you it is justice. He explained that people who let insults control their mood are handing their entire day, sometimes their entire mood for weeks, to someone who does not even think about them anymore. This is the cost that most people never calculate. They think they are punishing the other person by staying upset, when in reality they're only punishing themselves, extending the damage far past the moment it actually happened. Recognizing this pattern is uncomfortable but freeing. It means you stop asking why people are cruel or careless, and you start asking why their words still have so much control over your mind hours later. This shift alone changes everything. You begin to notice the gap between an event and your response to it. And inside that gap is where all Stoic strength actually lives. Most people never notice this gap exists. They believe the insult and the reaction are the same thing, happening automatically with no space in between. Stoicism trains you to find that space and use it wisely. This first step is not about becoming cold or emotionless. It is about becoming aware. Once you know that your pain comes from your own judgment of the event, not the event itself, you gain a kind of quiet control nobody can take from you. People can say what they want about you, but they cannot force you to accept it as true unless you let them. This awareness is the foundation everything else in this video builds on. Without it, every technique that follows will feel like a trick. With it, those same techniques become a real, lasting change in how you move through the world. Number 2, Stop reacting. The Stoic power of silence. When someone disrespects you, their goal, whether they realize it or not, is often to get a reaction. A visible reaction confirms they got to you. It tells them their words landed and mattered. The Stoic response is to deny them that confirmation entirely. This does not mean pretending nothing happened. It means choosing on purpose not to hand over your composure. Silence in this context is not weakness or defeat. It is a decision made with full awareness. And it is one of the hardest things to do because every instinct in your body wants to defend itself immediately. Marcus Aurelius faced constant criticism, plotting, and disrespect from people close to him, including members of his own family and court. He rarely responded with outbursts. Instead, historical accounts describe him as someone who absorbed insults calmly and continued his work. This was not because he did not feel anything. It was because he understood that reacting instantly, in the heat of the moment, almost always leads to words or actions you later regret. Silence gave him time. Time gave him clarity. Clarity gave him the ability to respond, if a response was even needed, in a way that actually served him. There is a practical reason silence works so well against disrespect. Most disrespectful behavior is designed to provoke a specific type of reaction, usually anger, defensiveness, or visible hurt. When you refuse to give that reaction, the entire interaction becomes confusing for the other person. They expected a fight or a wounded response, and instead they got calm. This unpredictability often makes people uncomfortable in ways a heated argument never would. It forces them to sit with their own behavior, because your silence removes the distraction of a counterattack they could point to and blame. Silence also protects your energy. Every time you argue back, defend yourself loudly, or try to prove someone wrong in the moment, you're spending mental and emotional resources on a person who likely does not deserve that investment. Seneca often wrote about guarding time and attention as if they were the most valuable things a person owns because they are. He argued that people are careful with money but reckless with their hours and their peace of mind, giving both away to anyone who provokes them. Choosing silence is choosing to keep that energy for yourself, for your goals, and for the people who actually deserve it. It is important to separate silence from suppression. Suppression is pretending you feel nothing while the anger builds quietly underneath, waiting to explode later in an unrelated moment. That is not Stoic strength, that is delayed damage. True Stoic silence comes after you have acknowledged the feeling honestly to yourself, processed why it stung, and then made a clear choice not to give it away to someone who does not deserve your energy. The difference is subtle but critical. One is avoidance. The other is discipline. Only one of them actually leads to lasting peace and real strength over time. Over time, silence becomes a kind of reputation. People who know you cannot be provoked easily start to treat you differently, often without even realizing why. They sense that cheap insults will not land the way they expect, so they either stop trying or they begin to respect the composure they cannot break. This is not manipulation. It is simply the natural result of consistent self-control. The people who once disrespected you, expecting a reaction that never came, often end up feeling smaller in the exchange than you do. And that quiet shift in power is far more lasting than any argument could ever be. Number 3, master your emotions so no one can control you. Every time someone can predict your emotional reaction, they hold a small amount of power over you. If they know that a certain comment will make you angry, or that ignoring you will make you desperate for their approval, they can use that knowledge whenever they want something from you. Stoic philosophy treats emotional mastery not as suppression, but as a form of independence. Epictetus divided the world into things within our control and things outside of it, placing our own judgments, choices, and reactions firmly in the first category, and other people's opinions and behavior in the second. This distinction sounds simple, but living by it takes real practice. Most people spend enormous effort trying to control things that are not theirs to control, such as what others think of them, whether people apologize or whether an unfair situation gets corrected. Meanwhile, they neglect the one thing that actually is theirs to control completely, which is their own internal response. Epictetus taught that freedom comes only from focusing your effort where it belongs. When you stop trying to control how others treat you and instead focus entirely on how you respond, you take back the only power that was ever truly yours. Emotional mastery does not mean you stop feeling anger, embarrassment, or hurt. It means those feelings no longer dictate your next move. There's a difference between feeling something and being driven by it. A person with Stoic training can notice anger rising, acknowledge it honestly, and still choose a calm, deliberate response rather than an impulsive one. This is a skill built through repetition, much like physical training. Each time you catch yourself before reacting and choose your response instead, you strengthen the same mental muscle, and over time that pause between feeling and action becomes longer and steadier. One practical tool the Stoics used constantly was preparing for difficulty in advance. Seneca often imagined negative scenarios ahead of time, not out of pessimism, but to remove their shock value. If you have already imagined someone disrespecting you and thought through how you want to respond, the real moment loses much of its power over you. It stops being a surprise attack on your emotions and becomes something you already anticipated and prepared for. This technique, sometimes called negative visualization, is one of the most effective ways to build emotional steadiness before you are ever tested. Another key part of emotional mastery is separating a person's behavior from your own identity. If someone calls you weak, lazy, or unworthy, that statement does not automatically become true. It is simply their opinion, shaped by their own limited view, their own insecurities, or their own bad day. The Stoics taught that only you can truly damage your own character through dishonesty, cowardice, or cruelty toward others. No outside insult can touch that core unless you allow it to. Holding on to this distinction firmly is what allows a person to hear harsh words without their sense of self collapsing under the weight of them. When you master your emotions to this degree, something interesting happens in how others treat you. People who once tested you to see how far they could push start to notice there is nothing to push against. Your calm becomes a kind of quiet boundary that communicates far more than words ever could. This is not about becoming distant or unfeeling toward the people who matter to you. It is about no longer being an easy target for people who do not. Emotional mastery, built slowly and honestly, becomes the foundation for every other form of strength discussed in this video. Number 4, let your actions speak. Excellence as the ultimate response. Words are cheap, and the Stoics knew this well. Arguing with someone who disrespects you often just turns into two people repeating their positions louder and louder, with nothing actually resolved. A far more powerful response is quiet, consistent excellence in your own life. When you focus your energy on becoming better at your work, more disciplined in your habits, more reliable in your relationships, your growth speaks in a way that arguments never can. People can dismiss your words in the moment, but they cannot dismiss results that keep showing up over months and years. Marcus Aurelius wrote frequently about doing his duty well regardless of what others said or did around him. He believed that a person's job was to act with excellence and integrity, not to manage what other people thought or said about that excellence. This mindset removes a huge amount of wasted energy. Instead of spending hours crafting the perfect comeback to an insult, that same energy goes into finishing the project, improving the skill, or strengthening the relationship that actually matters. Over time, this consistent effort builds a version of you that speaks louder than any single argument ever could. There's also a psychological shift that happens when you stop trying to win arguments and start trying to win at life. Arguments keep you locked in the past, replaying what was said and planning what you should have said instead. Building something, whether it is a skill, a career, or a stronger version of yourself, keeps you moving forward. This forward motion is not just more productive, It is also more satisfying on a deep level because it gives you real evidence of growth instead of just a temporary feeling of having proven a point to someone who likely was not even listening. This approach also changes how disrespect affects you day to day. When your identity is built on your actions and your growth rather than on how others perceive you, an insult loses much of its weight. It becomes a passing comment rather than a verdict on your worth. Seneca wrote about building an inner fortress, a stable sense of self rooted in your own effort and character, not an outside approval. A person standing inside that kind of fortress can hear criticism, even unfair criticism, without feeling like their entire foundation is shaking, because the foundation was never built on other people's opinions in the first place. Excellence, as a response, also has a practical effect on the people who disrespected you. Time has a way of revealing the truth about a person's effort and character. The co-worker who mocked your slow progress often watches quietly as that progress eventually surpasses their own. The family member who dismissed your plans sometimes ends up asking for advice once those plans succeed. This is not guaranteed, and it should never be the main reason you pursue excellence, but it is a common and honest pattern. Consistent effort tends to outlast careless words, and most people eventually notice the difference, whether they admit it out loud or not. The deepest benefit of this approach, though, has nothing to do with what others eventually see or say. It is the internal shift in how you feel about yourself. When you know, through real evidence built over time, that you are becoming more capable, more disciplined, and more grounded, other people's opinions start to matter less on their own, without you having to force that feeling. This is not indifference born from bitterness. It is confidence born from actual effort. Letting your actions speak is slower than a sharp comeback, but it builds something an insult can never touch and time can never take away. Number 5, detach from their opinion. Indifference as power. One of the hardest but most freeing Stoic lessons is learning that you do not need everyone to see your worth for it to be real. Most people chase validation without even realizing it, adjusting their behavior, their tone, sometimes their entire personality, based on what they think others expect. This constant adjustment is exhausting, and it hands enormous power to people who may not even deserve a small amount of your attention. The Stoics practiced something they called indifference toward things outside their control, and other people's opinions sit firmly in that category, no matter how much those opinions might sting in the moment. This does not mean you stop caring about people entirely or become cold toward those who matter to you. It means you stop needing approval from people who have shown you, through their disrespect, that their opinion is not built on genuine understanding of who you are. Epictetus often pointed out that people judge others based on limited information, personal bias, insecurity, or simply a bad mood that has nothing to do with you. Giving weight to a judgment built on such shaky ground is, in his view, a kind of self-inflicted harm that most people commit without ever questioning it. Practicing this kind of detachment takes repetition, much like any other skill. A useful method is to pause after feeling hurt by someone's words and ask yourself a simple question. Does this person actually know me well enough for their opinion to carry real weight? Often the honest answer is no. A stranger's rude comment, a co-worker's careless remark, an acquaintance's snide joke, none of these come from deep knowledge of your character, your effort, or your history. Recognizing this does not erase the sting immediately, but it does shrink it, and with repeated practice, that shrinking becomes faster and more automatic. There's also a deeper layer to this detachment that goes beyond just ignoring rude comments. Seneca taught that constantly worrying about what others think keeps a person trapped in a kind of invisible prison, always performing, always adjusting, never fully free to act according to their own values. Breaking out of that prison does not happen through anger at the people who built it. It happens through a quiet, internal decision to stop checking the walls for their approval. Once that decision is made and practiced consistently, a person often feels a kind of lightness they did not realize they were missing before. It is worth noting that this kind of indifference is not the same as arrogance. Arrogance says other people's opinions do not matter because you consider yourself superior. Stoic indifference says other people's opinions do not define your worth because your worth was never theirs to define in the first place. This distinction matters because arrogance is fragile, built on comparison, and easily wounded by any real challenge. Stoic detachment is stable, built on internal understanding rather than external comparison, and it holds steady even when challenged, because it was never dependent on winning against anyone else to begin with. When you genuinely stop needing the approval of people who disrespect you, something interesting tends to happen. Those same people often work harder to get a reaction from you, sometimes without even realizing why your indifference bothers them so much. Your detachment removes the payoff they were seeking, and without that payoff, disrespect starts to feel pointless even to them. This is not something you should chase as a strategy to manipulate others. It is simply a natural consequence of genuine inner freedom, and it tends to be one of the clearest signs that this Stoic practice has actually taken root in your daily life. Number 6, become untouchable, living the Stoic life that makes them regret it. Everything discussed so far in this video builds toward one final result, a version of you that disrespect simply cannot touch in any lasting way. This is not about becoming invincible or pretending to have no feelings. It is about becoming so grounded in your own character, your own effort, and your own understanding of what is actually within your control that insults and dismissal stop having the power to shake you. This kind of stability is not given to anyone. It is built slowly, day by day, through the same small choices discussed throughout this video, repeated consistently until they become second nature. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself in his private writings that he did not need the world to change in order for him to remain steady. He needed his own mind to remain steady regardless of what the world did around him. This same principle applies directly to disrespect. You cannot control whether people are rude, dismissive, or cruel. You can control whether their behavior determines your mood, your self-worth, or your next decision. Choosing steadiness over and over in small moments that nobody else even notices is what eventually builds the kind of inner strength that outside events cannot easily break. Becoming untouchable in this sense also changes how you view the people who disrespected you in the first place. Instead of viewing them as enemies to defeat, Stoic philosophy encourages viewing them almost as difficult teachers, unintentional ones, who reveal exactly where your own reactions still need work. Every uncomfortable interaction becomes useful information rather than just pain. This does not mean thanking people for cruelty or seeking out disrespect on purpose. It means recognizing that if you can remain calm and grounded during a genuinely difficult moment, you have proven something real to yourself that no comfortable moment could have taught you. There's a quiet kind of justice in this process, even though justice was never the main goal. People who disrespect others often do so because it works, because it gets a reaction, because it makes them feel a temporary sense of control. When that stops working on you specifically, they're often left facing their own behavior without a distraction to hide behind. Some genuinely reflect and change. Others simply move on to easier targets. Either way, the version of you that remained calm, focused, and unaffected has already won something far more valuable than an argument, which is your own uninterrupted peace of mind. This transformation rarely happens overnight, and it is important to be honest about that. There will be days when old patterns return, when a comment lands harder than expected, when silence feels impossible to maintain. Seneca himself admitted in his writings that even after years of studying and teaching these ideas, he still struggled with anger and impatience at times. Stoicism was never about achieving flawless perfection. It was about consistent, honest effort toward becoming steadier than you were the day before. Progress, not perfection, is the actual standard the Stoics live by, and it is the standard worth holding on to here as well. In the end, the most powerful outcome of this entire process is not that people who disrespected you feel regret, although that often happens naturally over time as they watch you grow steadier and stronger while their words lose all effect. The real outcome is that you stop needing their regret at all. You build a life, a character, and a level of inner peace that no longer depends on anyone else's reaction to validate it. That is the true Stoic response to disrespect, not a clever comeback or a moment of revenge, but a quiet, lasting strength that outlasts every insult ever aimed at it. If this video helped you, consider subscribing for more Stoic wisdom applied to real, everyday struggles.